folks, to our first ever TNP Roundtable. Today I have with me some wonderful members of our community today to here to talk about current events and issues occurring in our region of TNP. Today with us, we have our wonderful Delegate Robespierre,
Hello.
on and off again Security Council member Tlomz,
Hey, what's up?
Chief Justice Ghost,
Hi.
and longtime TNP Theologian Wonderess.
Good evening to y'all.
Interviewing and discussing with them will be myself, Minister of Radio Gap, and recording us will be the wonderful Koopa. Now, as of late, Robes, you have been conducting a cleaning out of sorts among your cabinet. Can you explain to us why you are doing so and what your rationality behind it is?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, when you look at, periods in which a cabinet would be changed or the composition of a cabinet would be changed, you're probably usually thinking, specific points at like, maybe the midterm mark or maybe at a certain month point. It makes these slates of changes a little bit untimely, but there is a clear reason why it's happening at this point in time. And when you're running an administration of any size, especially one as large as TNP's, you have to look at, two main things. Firstly, the progress you're making on the goals that you set out to achieve, and secondly, what your minister's contributions are to that progress. And, with it being the summer lull and everything like that, and just the general trend of the world and in us at the moment, we're seeing that a lot of people are snatched up by real life, whether they're ministers or otherwise. And it just so happens that we've had ministers in the past week or so who, for one reason or another, have all needed to step aside due to real life time constraints. And me being the delegate, I need to make sure that we finish off the term as strong as possible. So I want to make sure that we're bringing in people who can contribute for the next month and a half or so, as opposed to people who will be limited in their time. Obviously, I obviously respect them all for their service, but, in the case of Westenor obviously led the NPA to great success earlier this term, and the whole worry there was just time constraints, real life things coming up that was going to make it to where they couldn't be around as much to lead as effectively as we knew they could lead. So I am happy to have Rom acting in their stead and being the replacement there, because Rom's someone who, been Minister of Defense before, has been a deputy before, is a current general. He knows what he's doing, so I'm happy to have him along. With cards and radio, it's a little bit different in the sense that, you know, the reality is we need to make strong progress in those areas to meet the targets that I set out to achieve. So I appointed both yourself as new Minister of Radio and, moreover, to help give those ministries a shot in the arm and give them the production boost that they need with young, eager, enthusiastic leaders at the helm who can really make a difference.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, would anyone like to ask any questions? Any wonder?
Are we all done with the minister changes, or are there more in the works?
At the moment I don't have any other minister changes planned, and I think that three for a week is probably enough. I wouldn't want to change ministers too often, keep a sense of continuity there. But I can definitely say, the areas that I looked at were obviously underperforming areas, and when you look at areas like home affairs, foreign affairs, defense, Intel Western, had to resign. Obviously, I don't anticipate that those ministers are going anywhere unless, their real life situation changes or they tell me otherwise. But no, I think for the most part we are done with the minister changes, thankfully.
That sounds good.
Unless I just fire everyone, and no, I can't do that. The Constitution doesn't let. No, 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 no. The jokes aside, the Constitution doesn't let me do that. So I'll be a good delegate and not do that.
I mean, you could fire them. You just have to replace the essential ones.
Yeah, I could fire them. I just have to replace them. Maybe if Kretox were around, he would tell me how to replace them with crony versions.
Robespierre and his great purge.
Oh,
Absolutely.
there's a question I have. I'm just
What's up?
curious about it. You're the first delegate in a while who's had a vice delegate also serve in your cabinet. How do you think that's gone uh, so far in this term?
Quite frankly, it actually hasn't posed as much. I didn't think it would pose any of an issue, but it's actually came out to where it's more advantageous than I perceived it to be. And that's because rather than, the vice delegate more focused on the elected position of vice delegate, it seems that early on in the term, especially, Kretuk's put a lot of time, effort, and consideration into improving the Ministry of World Assembly Affairs, which obviously, I'm appreciative of that. I'm grateful for that. So I think having him on the cabinet has not been, it's unorthodox because it hasn't happened in a long time, but it's not detracting from his performance as a minister being vice delegate also, because as a minister I would say he's made strides in improving the ministry from what it was in the previous term. So I would say on the ministerial side of things it's definitely been a good move. The two security counselors in the room on the vice delegate side of things, you could speak about it if you wanted to, but speaking purely from the ministry point of view, I think it's been a net positive having him as a member of the cabinet.
Sounds good to me. So, now kind of moving on here, I was going to move on to the topic of the judiciary. So, I thought it would be appropriate to ask Ghost about this. So, for the recent judicial elections, you and Lore and Dredton have all been elected to position of justice. So, do you three have any plans on reforming the judiciary, or do you have plans to keep it as it is now? Anything in particular?
Well, I don't know if you saw my address to the regional assembly about this topic, but I've kind of given up on the idea of reforming the judiciary. I don't really know that that's something we can do or that even people want to do. Not without changing it in a way that makes it kind of unlike what people are used to, and they like their elections, for example. It's one big way to change them. So I think the best approach now is education. It's trying to make sure we have better candidates and that they kind of know what they're doing going in. And we don't want a repeat of what happened with the Attorney General's office, where we were really concerned about the knowledge of the people who were going in there, and they barely had anything to do, so learning on the job wasn't really an option for them. So I know Dredton, in particular, wants to spearhead the education aspect, trying to build a guide for previous cases, make it even easier to read them. I recently updated that, and I want to do an index. So Dredton and I are kind of on the same page on that, and I'm focusing more on improving how I communicate, kind of setting an example for other justices how I think they should run the court in the future. And as I have more things to do on the court, I hope I can illustrate that for them.
Makes sense. Anybody have any comments, questions for Ghost?
I actually am sort of curious what each of us think about, the number of candidates we saw run this past judicial election. Do we think that the number is indicative of greater interest, since the number itself doesn't really tell us much, because there's obviously a difference between people putting their names up and then just running, or people actually really considering the role and being interested in it? But do we think, that number shows that more people are becoming interested, or do we think that was just sort of a one-time thing?
It was not them being interested. The quality of the campaigns, I think, was proof enough that we really didn't have that number of candidates. We just had names on a ballot. We probably only really had 4 or 5 candidates.
Mm. So, continuing with the topic of the judiciary, I thought it would be appropriate to also bring up the topic of the Reject Fascism bill authored by yourself, Ghost, which just passed in the R8 a day or two ago. Now, at this moment, it is being contested in the courts, which you are a part of. Do you have anything to say about that?
I'm going to be really technical here. I don't necessarily consider it being contested in the courts because the court hasn't actually decided if they're going to hear the R for R yet. So someone's trying to challenge it in the court, but yeah, that's not really happening yet.
Gotta stay within the lines on those procedures, Ghost, don't you?
Now, I would like to ask all members of the panel their thoughts on the bill. So, I'll start with you, Rope.
Well, speaking as someone who abstained on the actual bill itself, and if we'd like, I guess to sort of rehash a reason as to why I would abstain, but I understand that a large part of the community had the exact same shall we say, intent with what they wanted to achieve. The end goal was the same for a lot of us, and that was to just show how fascism is not okay, has no place in the community, isn't acceptable, etc. And I think that a lot of people did share in that viewpoint. I would say that, I don't think it's a stretch to say all of us share in that viewpoint here. Um, but it was more so a dispute of how best to achieve that. Going into it, I remember I wanted to see what the admin team's response was first and foremost before I took any sort of, position on the bills that were being presented, because Ghosts wasn't the only suggested solution. Um, but after seeing what the admin team had put out and how they plan to address it with the, uh, shall we say, Committee on Community Guidelines, I realized that, they weren't going to be taking direct action. So it's actually my hope that the bill itself, as it exists in law now, at one point or another doesn't become necessary. If we can get to a point where our community standards, adequately cover something once they're developed, or to where the community feels a certain way about what's happening and they feel that the issue is, addressed or, resolved, for lack of a better word, then we will no longer need that bill and that bill will become obsolete. But until such time, I do recognize that the community, demands that. They made their will very clear that they wanted something to happen by voting for it. So I saw me signing the bill as being the executor of that will, as I'm supposed to, as a regional leader. And it's not, albeit the perfect fix. You know, I'm sure there will be other members of this panel to dispute that. But it is something that, people wanted immediate action. People wanted something to tide us over, if you will, until the community guidelines are developed. And I see this bill as that. I don't think it's the permanent solution, but I do think it's a step in the right direction.
Hmm. So I would like to pass this then over to Wondrous. Give your thoughts and your opinions on this bill.
So I'm going to try to make this as concise as possible, if that's even possible for me. But before I start, I wanted to kind of contextualize my words here within a greater important decision I've made regarding myself here in TNP. And Fiji knows about this. I made this decision while voting was going on. I told him, Fiji, if this bill passes, then I will have no choice but to depart from the North Pacific in its entirety as a citizen and whatnot, because I just fundamentally disagree with the avenue the citizenry has taken to deal with this issue. I'll try to contextualize that once again, but I don't think it'll do any good when it comes to anyone's opinions about the bill. I think in order for there to be virtuous governance, there has to be a humanity to the governing. What that means is, yes, when we face problems, we have to deal with them the strongest way possible so they don't end up, going rampant and taking over our government or causing pain and suffering, as fascism often does. I admit that. But it is people who hold ideologies. And so I am a strong believer that if you have a problem, the best way to deal with it is to show its errors through dialogue. And I've heard it before, dialogue doesn't work, or you just have to come down with the band hammer. I understand that point of view. But I think this bill is starting to see the encroachment of this anger and these ideologies into our political world. And because we're going in this direction now, I just feel like I can no longer be a part of the region because it's going somewhere I can't go. And so, with that fundamental disagreement, I have to make a very difficult decision and live with it.
Hmm. So this is more of a moral issue for you?
People who know me know it's always about the moral issue.
Yeah. I actually do have a question for you on the response, Wonders. It was the response I anticipated, but if you will, can you contrast your stance with that of Fiji's and what he's expressed? Do you see a difference there in the approach you take it and the angle that he looks at it through, or is it more so, you think he's concerned with the moral question just as you are?
It's a very interesting and excellent question, Rhodes. I will say, I think Fiji, the language he uses is a lot more constitutional. So he's working much more within an enlightenment context, the right of the individual, free speech and expression, where I'm less concerned about that and more about how we handle the issue in a humane way. So I think we both are going to the same place, the same conclusion, but our paths are definitely different.
Hmm.
So
That is
with
very interesting.
so if I can ask a follow-up. So with that, you say it's the humane treatment of things. what would be indicative of a humane treatment towards a citizen who might openly identify as fascist? What would you see as the nature of that treatment being if we were going to look at it through a humane lens?
Certainly. So I've actually have had experiences in my own servers with fascists coming through, and eventually, yes, I did end up banning them. But it took a long time. At first, there was a lot of conversation and debate and dialogue and trying to really show them the errors of their thoughts, not just because they're wrong, but because they're rationally incoherent. And only after those, months or two of trying to get them to understand did I finally see, well, they're not going to listen to us, and they are causing problems to our community. And therefore, after much of trying our best to fix the situation diplomatically, then the ban came along. So I would say it requires at least trying it. I know we want to say a lot of times these fascists, they've made up their minds, this is the way they are, so we just got to deal with them preemptively. But I strongly believe everyone's deserving of the chance to at least try to change. And since we're right here in front of them, who better than us who have the capacity to do so?
So rehabilitation would be the word as opposed to, punitive punishment.
I would say that's a great parallel, yes.
Fair enough.
And it's a very profound and very thoughtful, very I think you're very it's very compassionate. Some would argue more than some of these people deserve, but it's a very compassionate and a very open-minded way of doing and conducting affairs like this. Thank you, Wando. Now,
Ghost and Tlomz have anything to add?
yeah, I'd say Tlomz, what do you want to say about this whole situation?
I think this entire situation is very black and white. Fascism is not at all compatible with the values we hold in TNP, and every other GCR in existence has some law on the books that prevents fascists from being in their region. We've always relied on the fact that when a fascist shows up, it's only a matter of time before they break some community standard that gives us the ability to get rid of them. This is the first situation in which this hasn't happened, and it was rightly called out by the large portion of the GP community, Cormac led by that. So as we press on forward, when we take this bill, there is certainly an argument to be made. Fiji is not by any means not intelligent. He knows the argument he's making. However, we need to realize that even if this passes and even if the R4R is recognized and the bill is struck down, this isn't going to change anything. The Vice Delegate will still be getting rid of fascists because the Vice Delegate has a long-running confirmed ability to reject anyone and everyone they want without challenge, assuming it passes the Regional Assembly, of course. And whether we like it or not, that's not going to change from here on out. The Vice Delegate will continue to get rid of fascists. So we can get this off the books from a moral standpoint, but it's really not going to change anything. And while with Wando's point, I completely understand what he is saying, in that being able to talk with them and do that is something that's possible. We are the largest region in nation states, and we have many people come join our Discord every day and apply to be citizens every day. We don't have the ability to give the goodwill of robust debate and conversation to every single person who wants to come in here and spread shitty opinions or bad ideologies. So while fascism being the point ideology of, or being the worst ideology of them all in nation states right now, giving them the benefit of the doubt tends to almost never work, and it's usually not worth either our moderators' times or our government's time. So I see this as nothing but moral posturing going forward, and regardless of if this bill is taken down or not, it's not going to change anything. The VD will get rid of them, and hopefully, as we refine community standards, the admins will be getting rid of them.
So, Wondrous, do you have anything to say about this, or anything in response?
Well, honestly, it's the most legitimate Tlomzian response I could have hoped for. And I appreciate that, his honesty and directness. I will say, yes, I think from a pragmatic point of view, if we're talking about governance, power, TMP's place in the world, that there are steps that can be taken that are a little bit less, compassion, shall we say, and just dealing with them, because people start asking questions like, why is TMP harboring fascists? Why are they not getting rid of them immediately? Are they fascists themselves? I get there's a lot of context to this sort of question that can be very burdensome to our government and to our region. But I can't help but notice that there's things beyond that that matter most of all, and I think it's worth the time. And as you said, we're the largest region, so I think that would therefore mean we had the greatest amount of resources to accomplish some sort of dialogue. I do know that the region's made its mind up, and I can't change its position anymore, if ever. But I'm not coming to this conversation hoping to change minds, but just give an alternative perspective as I see it.
I can appreciate that alternative viewpoint, even if it's not one that I necessarily agree with. However, I do think that Thielms makes a good point when he was talking about how people, the fascists specifically, will eventually violate something that means that we can ban them. And that is something that happens oftentimes, where if you have, a troublesome nation that's founded in the region, maybe vaguely on its profile fields in NS, it's got something kind of fascist related, but until they make an R&B post or speak about it or publish a dispatch, you really don't get a feel for what the person behind that nation is like just by the looks of it. And I think that a lot of times, when you see posts on the R&B by some of these nations, it's the outward, when they say something or when they have an outburst or when they make a comment that is not an acceptable comment to make. I think that's when you see their true stripes, so to speak, because um, it I've always been of the opinion that these community members. Well, I'm not even gonna really say that they're community members, honestly, because we know what we're about as a community, and we're not about that. So I don't think we can even count them in with that. But the fascists, they will screw up at one point or another. They honestly will. Even if they're trying to bite their tongue and not say something, they will eventually say it, and that's at which point they slip up and you ban them. But I think I can understand the issue that people have, where it's like, okay, but until the time where they slip up, you still have to coexist with them, or you still have to interact with them. And I feel like, some people are unwilling to do that, or some people wouldn't want to coexist with them, even if the fascists themselves are being passive and not saying anything outwardly towards them. So I can understand it from both points of view, but I do agree with T-Lumps that at one point or another, the fascists, they will screw up, they will say something stupid, and yes, action would be taken at that point.
Now, I'd like to ask
To actually
Ghost,
quickly add
Sid.
something on
Oh,
top of that.
oh, absolutely. Go ahead.
And this was a point brought up in other places, and this is more from an admin standpoint, but I do resonate with the idea that we shouldn't have to wait for them to either harass a community member or do something bad that we expect them to do to get rid of them, especially when there are many people in this community who have been either suffered from real life fascism or have suffered from abuse from very, very far right individuals, whether it be online abuse or anything in the more modern age as well, especially with our LGBT community and Jewish community. So there's certainly a lot of issue of waiting for one of them to be abused for us to actually do something about it.
I 100% agree with that. I'm actually glad you brought that up because even if you come to the realization that they will screw up sooner or later, it's almost like by enabling them to coexist with others until they do so, until such time, it's almost like you're daring them to prey on community members because you know it'll happen. You're just waiting for it so it becomes actionable, and that in itself, I do agree that it's problematic because number one, you're sort of taking a gamble with, okay, who will it be? Who will they approach? Who will they say something to? But what we have to understand is that even once they say something, or even once they do something that's actionable, it still carries the potential to obviously hurt people, especially those who have been personally affected by what they're speaking about, what they're advocating for. So I think that, there definitely is the question of, well, we shouldn't be leaving that lamb to slaughter in a way. But it's like, the admin team has made it clear that without, concrete, this is actionable, there's not much that can be left up to interpretation there until something becomes actionable. So it kind of becomes a juggling act, which leads us to exactly why we're having this conversation.
All right, so Ghost, do you have anything to say about this, or would you like us to move on?
I have a question for Wando.
Absolutely, go ahead.
I'm just curious, of all the people he's had to ban from his community, is there anybody who got banned relatively quickly, like in a few days, maybe even the same day?
Well, Ghost, given the specificity of your question, I would assume you're referring to a story we were both mutually in. Are you speaking, if you're speaking of a specific example, then I ask you to name it.
No, I'm actually not talking about a specific thing. I'm asking a hypothetical question about you running the region where you're currently the delegate.
Yeah, okay. Well, the core server, I have not, as far as I remember, in my time as head of that region, had to immediately ban someone from the Discord. No.
What about the region itself?
So I had never, no, I never banned or rejected people from the region, mainly because my influence was too low to do so. But I did have to suppress a few posts because there were some fascist sounding things that were not in alignment with Catholic ideals and thus needed to be suppressed. And that did cause a sort of schism because there are some radical Catholics that were once in that region, but they have made their own little region now. But they left of their own accord. I never took action to remove them myself.
So it makes me think of something that's just kind of an open question for all of us. You know, there's obviously the issue of public perception of a region and how we deal with this, comparing TNP to Catholic and things of, that comparison. It's that, do we think others looking on the outside are justified in, maybe questioning what our leadership is like because we don't act on certain things a certain way? Or do we think, it's a misconception that's unfortunate but not necessarily warranted or validated?
I'd actually say that's a pretty interesting thought. Knowing, like, as a media person, as someone who's into media and public perception, I would say that it can be it can be taken one of two ways. It can be seen as being negligent on purpose, or they can kind of take the deeper look and say, okay, well, they have a deeper reasoning behind why they are ignoring said things. So it's kind of just how deep do you want to take it with, like, do you want to kind of take the superficial, like, oh, they're just being negligent, or maybe they're not even just being negligent, they're assisting fascists, which is in no way accurate to the situation. But if they want to take that route, they're welcome to. Now, with the deeper level where there's the constitutional complexities and such, that is kind of where you get to the meat of this all. So I think it's kind of, it varies, if that makes sense.
Well, I more so think that the crux of my question revolves around, the question of if our inaction emboldens them, and from an outward point of view, if people are going to take the time to understand the internal nuances, which I don't believe they are. I don't think that the casual observer in an SGP or even in the wider NS community is going to take the time to understand, okay,
Mm.
this is why they can't take action here, or this is why, they're restricted in doing this and that. To most people, and to people who have even advocated within our community, it's ban them and worry about everything else afterwards. And that's just the general observation that I've made. People want fascists out, which there's nothing inherently wrong with that. It's just that they seem to put that end goal above everything else. It's like putting the cart before the horse. And it's like you don't really think about, okay, so what are the consequences of doing that? What are the ramifications of doing that? As long as they're out, they see that as mission accomplished. So I'm wondering if, from an outward point of view, the onlookers to this whole thing, Cormac led and otherwise, if people feel that we're emboldening them, or if people have taken the time to understand why.
Well, if I'll say, I mean, nation states is a political game, and politics is looking for opportunities to get ahead, whether that means misconstruing something or just taking advantage of a situation to further one's own goals. And that's what you're going to deal with in the NS world. Good faith is dead in nation states, as far as I'm concerned. But I think what's more important is a regional authenticity, right? Hopefully, the outward image that we project is one for one what we actually are. And even if people fail to see what we actually are, that's a failing upon them. Because ultimately, what's most important is that we're true to ourselves. And hopefully, those who are willing and able to see us for what we are will see the value in that and therefore act accordingly and do good by us.
I think that's completely fair.
And I think that the efforts to get rid of fascist TMP are actually consistent with who we are. And I don't think the opposite is the case.
I think these are clashing values, and I think these are probably things that will never be solved, because it seems to me that both sides are rigidly set in their moral and constitutional and ethical convictions. And you're all actually right, I believe, in the end here. You're all right that fascists should be banned, but you're also right that we should abide by our principles. And I think that's where it kind of comes down to it, where in a way we are both enacting our principles and betraying our principles. It's kind of that situation where it's a ethical trap. That's a good way to put it, I think. And I don't think we'll necessarily find a way out of it, but in due time we will see how this all pans out.
Speaking as someone who's usually pretty predictably pessimistic, I actually think that the viewpoint that, oh, this is, such a nuanced issue that it's not going to get solved is actually in itself kind of pessimistic. What I've seen specifically, speaking about my viewpoint as delegate, is I've seen that a community that's rallied behind the cause of anti-fascism internally, and the only question at no point during this were people saying, okay, fascism acceptable. No one has said that, which is great. That's exactly, that would be upholding our values because obviously we've been dedicated to the anti-fascist cause for a number of years now. But I've seen a community that's rallied behind, okay, we clearly want these people out, we don't want them, we don't desire them, and we've had people in our community who have been willing to be so vocal about the issue. And it's the volume of them being vocal that I think really speaks to what we're about as a community. Because the people who usually wouldn't be loud were loud about this issue, and that shows that they do care and that people aren't just willing to let, whatever happen. There is a sort of standard that we all mutually hold, even if it's not the same standard that can be applied to our laws. There's a standard within our community of what we're willing to tolerate, what we're not willing to tolerate. So I think that the idea that it's never going to be solved, well, I think that in itself, this situation, though unfortunate, has taught us a number of things. And even though, it's sort of a predicament and sort of puzzling, I do think that it's something that, there are positives that can be taken out from it. There are solutions that we might gain from it. There are insights that we might explore from it. So I don't think that we need to look at this as like an overly, everything is bad. Yes, it's unfortunate, but I do think that there are ways for the community to move forward. And at the very least, we've learned something, and you can't put a price on that.
I agree.
I also agree fully with what you said, Robes. But I do fear there are not a lot. There are a few in the citizenry who don't seem to be able to accept certain premises that we've put forward. Like on multiple occasions, I saw feature even myself called "quote unquote" those who want to let fascists in the region, and I feel that sort of attitude towards us has made it very oversimplified in black and white. And my greatest fear, honestly, is that that mentality will somehow take over the region, and then that's the way TNP will operate in the future, according to these affairs.
I don't understand what that means. I've heard that kind of argued a few times. It's basically a slippery slope argument. Why do you think people would have this kind of rabid response to literally anything else other than fascists? I mean, you've seen how the anti-fascism movement has worked in this game for several years now. What else is there that people react the same way to? What's so out of the ordinary and unacceptable other than fascism that this kind of thing would happen? What realistically, what do you think's going to happen?
Well, I guess my main the things I'm drawing upon is how I've seen people just talk generally in TMP in the game, and also just the world around us. Right, the world's a very rough around the edges sort of place. But as people become more and more separated from each other ideologically, they turn the other ideology into an enemy. Right, so the word bigotry can be thrown around, or oppressor, and things like that, and then suddenly you have two very different sides villainizing one another, both from the right and the left. And I just don't want that same process to start to corrupt the political life of the region as well.
This isn't normal politics. We're talking about fascists here, not conservatives versus liberals. It's not the same thing. I I, I feel like you're actually, I don't know if you're doing this on purpose or unintentionally, but you're lumping in fascists with any other political ideology. They're not the same. They're not equal to the other ideologies. They require a different response because they are different. They are more dangerous and completely outside of regular community. And this effort you're doing, this effort Fiji's doing, it does have the effect of allowing fascists to stay, and it does treat them like just a more unsavory form of conservatism. I guess is really what you're saying. I guess I don't get it. I don't. My mind doesn't work that way. I can't understand that why you would want to pretend that you can treat them that way. That you can act like our community and protecting people here is less important than following some letter of a constitution that is in a game. And the reason fascism's bad is really has nothing to do with the game. So I know Wonder's always had this problem separating the in character from out of character stuff. So I guess that's where he's coming from. But that's why we're never going to see eye to eye on this, unfortunately.
Well, I think that's where a lot of people get into this sort of quandary, where it's the sort of this is an OC issue and or an OOC character issue. So a lot of this is OOC. It's all in Discord. It's not on the forum. It's not well. It can be in the RMB, but it's not exactly um, explicit there. Now, what I'd say about that is in the scenario, should we just have the admins do something about it instead of enforcing a law that would, uh, if this court case that is being currently put through the courts um, goes through, would it be unconstitutional or, the whole thing with that? So, would that kind of situation, like, so should we break our in game principles to please people OOC.
You
Now,
know, or okay, continue.
I was just going to say that because I feel like a lot of this is kind of focused in Discord and the RMB, where even though that it should be persecuted by admins, I do not think necessarily in game we should have that type of stipulation, considering the fact that it is just it's just not it's if this constitutionality pulls through or this not unconstitutionality case pulls through, it would not be like it just shouldn't be there. It's contradictory to what our entire thing is.
Ghost's words a few moments ago actually makes me curious about something that I wasn't originally curious with, but I do want to ask him about it. But before I do so, I just want to say that, you know, I think that we can all agree that the protection of the community and its members comes before anything else. That's even before
Absolutely.
in-character law, in-character constitutionality. I think that obviously the protection of the community reigns supreme, and I even think that the admin team would agree with me on that, as that is their primary function. In response to Ghost, I actually do have the question of, you're talking about how fascism isn't an ideology that you can treat like any other, and I agree with that. In terms of how harmful it is to others, would you put any other ideology known to man in the same category as fascism? Like, do you think we'd be seeing this much outrage if it were over, a communist who was extreme and a proponent of genocide or things of that nature? Would you put that in the same character or the same tier as fascism, or would you say that fascism is uniquely its own, uniquely harmful, and that even other ideologies such as extremism and communism would be put in a tier below fascism?
Well, first of all, yeah, it gets its own category. Nothing else comes close. But number two, I think you can actually put the extremist in communism thing into the fascist box because really then you're not really talking about communism anymore. You're basically talking about fascism. So yeah, it's its own thing. Even the extreme, book case of, extreme leftists is basically just fascism. So yeah, it's its own thing. Absolutely.
So then Stalinism would be also considered fascism in this
Well,
particular instance.
You're looking more at rabid authoritarianism that
yes.
oppresses.
At their core, they both involve very
Yeah.
authoritative, policies and things of that nature. It's interesting because I actually researched a little bit into how the societies that in the past have adhered to a fascist society, communist society, they have similar methods of implementation that decrease, civil liberties, things of that. But they take wildly different directions in terms of just like economic policy and outward view. But as far as like the way they treat people or the way that they structure their institutions, it's not as widely different left or right. It's not as black and white because it's really like still oppressive, still authoritative. Like it's still, for lack of a better term, bad. So
So then,
you do
when
have some
are
similarities, even though one's considered ultra right, one's considered ultra left. Even on the political spectrum, I don't think the political spectrum tells the entire story there.
so then I'd say our major enemy here. It's not necessarily the it's more authoritarianism, I would say, than
Our main
anything
issue
else.
is anyone who supports or advocates for any type of action or policy that would harm people. That's
Hmm.
basically, I feel like that's a pretty fair standard of what's, you know, harmful. If you're gonna say, okay, the people deserve this or we should do this, and it's harmful to those people and it's harmful to our community, then yeah, it doesn't matter if it's communism, fascism, or some other form of extremism. It's still not something we should have here, and I think we can all agree on that.
Hmm. All right.
Would just be directed at Robes.
Yeah, what's up?
So, as I'm sure you're aware, both your vice delegate and WA minister has now gone 6 days without logging onto the forums and could be considered MIA.
Hmm.
What would your plan be to deal with that if this extends for 2 weeks and you have a double vacation?
So hopefully, obviously, Kretox is going to return. I know these same issue as other ministers, where he's got real life constraints and things of that nature. But in the event that he were to go another week without logging in, we've seen that the Ministry of World Assembly Affairs has been able to do well even in his absence. We're still sitting at IFVs on time. We're still stacking and stomping at updates when they happen. This is mostly credit to the works of, Boston Castle, Castonvia, even Greater Cessnica, even Jed. We've seen a lot of staffers this term be recruited by Kretox or by others within the ministry, to where it's no longer the one-man show that it was prior to your departure, if I may say so. Tlomz,
That's fair.
it's no longer the one man show where if the minister's not around, nothing happens. I think nowadays we do have staffers that are willing to step up, and in the event that he does go another week, I'll have to look to one of those staffers as a potential minister, because if he vacates office, then that's obviously something I have to have a contingency for, and with him or without him, the wheels have to keep turning. I'm hoping for Kretox's return, just as we all are, but
Of course.
progress still has to be made, regardless of if he's here or if he's not. The wheel can't stop turning, and I would look to, Boston and other members to continue that wheel.
So, for everybody, as a sort of cool down question, uh, this one relates to the Rainbow Tournament, which is currently going on now. What color do you guys favor, purple or blue?
Let me just say, I was Team Red from the start. Okay, I'm upset that Red lost because, and this is weird because I'm colorblind in real life.
Oh,
Understand that I don't have any idea what these colors look like in the sense of like how you guys would think they look like. So I'm just going off of, I guess, whatever I think is the most favorable option. It's not even like, oh, what's appealing to me, because I don't know. But it's like I was Team Red for the simple fact that I always claim that Crimson Red, which is a dark red, is like one of my favorite colors, because it's hard for me to name favorite colors, but Crimson Red is one I've narrowed down. And I know that the Ryzen, AMD Ryzen, is always called Team Red, so I was supporting Team Red from the start because I love Ryzen. Anyway, but now that red is sadly out of the mix, I'm gonna have to go for blue. Good old TNP, blue. When you think of blue chip TNPers, you think of the color blue because it's on our flag. It's what we do. It's in our dispatches. Blue is definitely probably what represents our democracy the best, I'd have to say. Although I do understand the allure and appeal of purple. It's a very regal, royal color, very proper and noble.
hmm. T-Loms, purple or blue?
So I've always been a big turquoise fan, which is a blue
Hmm.
green. But I think I want to go with purple here. Change
Hmm.
it up a little bit.
It's
Give
pretty
give
good.
some opposition in the chat.
Yeah. All right. Wando, how about you? Purple or blue?
Blue.
Succinct.
That was a very quick and simple answer.
Succinct. I like it. All right,
Yeah,
Ghost. How
yeah.
about you?
Hi, sorry, I was, I had to take a call, so I missed the end of that last conversation. But I guess we're talking about colors now. So blue, yeah, blue. I'm gonna
All
be
right.
predictable.
It's
I'm
pretty
kind
good.
of tired of purple. I've been wearing purple for a while now, so blue's
Wait,
good.
Mm.
wait. When do you wear purple?
That's the justice color on the district
Oh,
uniform.
okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Here's an interesting thing for our listeners, because maybe not all of our listeners knew I was colorblind, but I was told that my roll color as delegate was red. Is that correct?
It is red.
Is it like a dark red, or is it like a like I don't even know. Is it like dark or
It's
shade of red?
It's
let
a
me look.
bold, darker red, but not like
Yeah,
a maroon.
Hmm.
It's
it's not maroon. It's actually more like crimson,
I
you could
remember.
say.
Okay, I was gonna say because I remember when I was vice delegate, the admins actually changed the roll color for me just because I asked them to, and they did it. And I actually had a dark vice delegate color that I associated as crimson, and I don't know why. I don't know if it was at the time, but after me, I remember they changed it back. And the roll color I have now is not as dark as the one I had when I was vice delegate. So,
Mm.
in my eyes, anyway.
I hadn't even realized it did that because I would consider that sacrilegious because the delegate color has always been cooler than the vice delegate color, and
Well,
you
hey,
had a better vice delegate color, then that's kind of
I
sucks.
did. I did. Yeah, we're not going to talk about that term, but I was going to say I was a cool vice delegate, but you know what? I'm a cooler delegate than I was a vice delegate. That is 100% fact. Brought to you by Robes.
So I must say I was kind of divided on this one because the color of TMP democracy is supposed to be blue. It's color of the ocean, that whole jazz. But purple has always been one of my favorite colors. Royal purple, greatest color. Royal purple and gold, two of the best colors. Now, I must also say, if I want to be loyal to TMP, I'd have to choose blue. So I'm going to choose blue.
While we're talking about colors, you guys can actually get me on record saying this because this is going to be uploaded. It's that if purple wins the TNP Rainbow Tournament, anyone who wants to make a purple variant of our TNP flag, in honor of that tournament, I will put up the purple variant of our flag for a week.
Don't we already have one? It's
I
actually a
think I
pretty
think
cool one
we
too.
do. Do we?
here we do. I know the
Yeah.
NPA just kind of decided to make like 5
Yeah,
flags
yeah.
one day.
NPA
They
make a whole bunch
probably
of flag.
have.
If someone has a purple flag, if purple wins and someone has a purple flag, give it to me and I'll put it up on the region, and we'll be purple TNP for a while.
I think it was one of the finalists in that flag contest we had a while ago. There's just it's the same flag but it's purple, and
Yeah, I know that like had like a pink variant, and some people were flying the pink. Like I guess people like the alternate color TNP flag. So if we have a purple one and purple wins, I will fly that flag for you guys, and we can be purple TNP.
Well, folks, if you're listening to this at the time of
This is not an
recording,
endorsement
or
for purple. It's vote blue, but I mean like
but yeah, vote blue. But if you want purple.
I mean purple's cool. I
Purple
wouldn't
is a
hold
cool
you.
color. I mean, although you are colorblind, so you don't know what purple looks like.
No, no, actually, I don't even know if this would fit in the context of the broadcast, but I guess for anyone who's curious, people always ask me, it's like, okay, is your colorblindness, is everything just in black and white and gray or thing? No, like the answer is no to that. It's like there are still colors in the world. They're just like all unknown colors that are not identifiable to me. Like I'll look at
Mm.
something and if someone tells me, okay, this is brown, I will use whatever that I see as like a comparison point to determine if other things are brown. I do everything by shades. So if someone tells me this is red, I'll like use that as like a comparison point, which it's like the best I know how to do. I just guesstimate. So
That is fascinating.
I also have a really good memory, so it kind of helps.
Hmm.
I just memorize stuff and then try to apply it. But yeah, that's how that works.
Hmm. That's amazing. Now, well, I'd like to thank you all for joining me tonight for the first TNP roundtable, and I also like to thank those who are watching in the little area that we have segregated off from here.
Audience.
And the
Mm,
audience. Yeah, wow.
live attendance.
Oh, yeah. And I'd also like to remind everybody that if they like the content that we make, then they should drop a like and subscribe, as it really helps to grow the NBS. Thank you all, and have a fantastic night.